My parents always joked I wasn't their real kid. I returned the favor at their anniversary party. Growing up, my parents had this hilarious running joke where they'd tell everyone I couldn't possibly be their kid. At restaurants, they'd tell the waiter I was adopted when I ordered something different from them. At school events, they'd laugh with other parents about how the hospital must have switched babies because I was nothing like them. My mom would say things like, our real daughter would have been athletic when I quit soccer for theater. My dad would tell his golf buddies that my love of reading meant I definitely wasn't his, because no kid of his would pick books over sports. They thought it was the funniest thing ever. When I was 13 and dyed my hair black, they told our entire extended family at Thanksgiving that this proved I wasn't theirs, because nobody in our family would make such weird choices. Everyone laughed. When I got into art school instead of business school like they wanted, the joke evolved. Now it was, the hospital owes us a refund, and somewhere out there our real daughter is probably everything we wanted. They'd say this stuff to my face at dinner. They'd say it to strangers who complimented my paintings. They'd say it to my boyfriend when I brought him home. He dumped me later because he said my family dynamic was too weird, and he didn't want to deal with parents who obviously resented their kid. My older brother Jeremy never got these jokes. He was exactly what they wanted. Played football, went to state school for business, married his high school girlfriend, gave them grandkids immediately. At his wedding, my dad's speech included a bit about being grateful they got at least one kid that was definitely theirs. Everyone laughed except my Aunt Diane, who pulled me aside later and said it was cruel. But the worst was when I won a national award for my sculpture work. It was a huge deal. Cash prize, gallery showing, everything. My parents came to the ceremony, and when the presenter asked them how proud they must be, my mom actually said, "We're still not convinced she's ours, but if she is, then sure, we're proud." The presenter looked horrified. People in the audience shifted uncomfortably. My dad jumped in with, "Yeah, we keep waiting for her real parents to show up and claim her." They laughed like it was perfectly normal. That's when I decided they wanted to play this game. I'd play it better. Their 30th anniversary was coming up and they'd planned this massive party. They asked me to make a speech. I said absolutely. I spent weeks preparing. Not the speech, but everything else. I called my Aunt Diane and asked for all the family photos from before I was born. I found pictures of my mom from right before and after my birth where she looked completely different. I dug up my dad's old yearbook where he had brown eyes, not the green he claimed were dominant in our family. I got creative with some basic photo editing. Nothing crazy, just enough to be convincing. The night of the party came. My parents were holding court at the head table, doing their usual routine. Someone complimented them on raising 2 kids, and my mom said, "Well, 1.5, since we're not sure about that one," while pointing at me. When it was speech time, Jeremy went first with this emotional tribute. Then it was my turn. I stood up and said I wanted to address something that had been bothering me for years. The room got quiet. I said my parents had always joked about me not being theirs, and I finally understood why. Because they were right. They weren't my biological parents. I pulled out the photos. I showed the one of my mom, before my birth, looking completely different. I showed my dad's yearbook photo and pointed out the eye color issue. I mentioned how neither of them had any artistic ability, but my real grandmother, who died before I was born, was supposedly a painter. I said I'd been suspicious for years, but their constant jokes made me finally look into it. The room was dead silent. My mother's face went white. My dad started to speak, but I kept going. I said it explained why they never bonded with me, why they always felt disconnected, why they could so easily joke about me not being theirs. Because deep down, they knew. I thanked them for raising me anyway, even though I wasn't their real daughter. I said I understood now why they preferred Jeremy, and I didn't blame them because blood matters. Then I said I was grateful they'd kept me despite knowing the truth. My mom started crying. My dad stood up and shouted that this was ridiculous. Of course I was their daughter. My Aunt Diane was trying not to smile. I opened the envelope slowly. The papers inside were blank. I pulled them out and let them scatter across the floor, white sheets floating down around my feet. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I looked at my parents and said the words I'd been holding back. I made it all up. The photos were edited. The eye color thing was fake. The grandmother story was a lie. All of it. Every single piece of evidence I just showed them was completely made up. The room went silent for maybe 2 seconds before my mother started screaming. Not words, just this high-pitched sound that made everyone freeze. My dad lunged forward, knocking his chair over backwards, and started moving toward me with his face twisted up in a way I'd never seen before. Someone's phone came out. Then another. I could see people holding them up, recording everything, and that made it worse somehow. My mom was crying and yelling at the same time, asking how I could do this to them, calling me horrible names in front of everyone. Guests were standing up, some moving closer, some backing away toward the exits. Jeremy just sat there at the head table with his mouth open and his face gone completely white. Diane appeared next to me and grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. She pulled me away from the microphone and started dragging me toward the side exit. My dad was still coming, pushing past people, and he shouted that I was dead to him, that I was no longer his daughter, that he never wanted to see me again. The coordinator tried to step in front of him, but he shoved past her. Diane kept pulling me, and I stumbled over my own feet trying to keep up. I looked back and saw Lisa jumping up from her seat and grabbing Victor and Virginia, hustling them toward a different door with her hands on their shoulders. Jeremy still hadn't moved. He just sat there staring at nothing while chaos exploded around him. People were talking all at once, some yelling questions at me, some trying to calm my parents down, some just standing there with their phones out getting it all on video. Diane got me through the side door and into the hallway. My legs felt weird and disconnected, like they weren't part of my body anymore. She didn't let go of my arm, just kept moving, pulling me along behind her through the hallway and out into the parking lot. The cold air hit my face and I realized I was sweating. My whole body was shaking, so hard my teeth were chattering. Diane walked me straight to my car and held out her hand for my keys. I dug them out of my purse but dropped them twice before I could get them in her hand. She picked them up and unlocked the driver's side, then pushed me toward it. Drive to my house. You can't be alone right now. I got in and tried to put the key in the ignition, but my hands were shaking too bad. It took 3 tries before I got it started. Diane ran to her own car 2 spots over, and I just sat there for a second with the engine running, staring at the steering wheel. Through the venue windows, I could see people moving around inside, see the chaos I'd left behind. Then Diane pulled up next to me and motioned for me to follow her, so I put the car in drive and did what she said because I couldn't think of anything else to do. Diane's house was only 15 minutes away, but it felt like hours. My hands kept slipping on the steering wheel because they were so sweaty. Every time I stopped at a red light, I could see my reflection in the rearview mirror, and I looked like a stranger. At her house, I parked crooked in the driveway and had to try twice to get the car in the park. She was already at my door opening it, helping me out like I was sick or hurt. Inside her house, she pointed me toward the couch and I sat down. She disappeared into the kitchen and I heard water running, heard her opening cabinets. I just sat there staring at her coffee table, at the magazines spread across it, at a water ring on the wood from someone's glass. Everything felt far away and muffled, like I was underwater. Diane came back with 2 mugs of tea and set one in front of me. She sat down in the chair across from me and didn't say anything. That's when I started crying. Not quiet crying, the ugly kind where you can't breathe right and your nose runs and you make horrible sounds. Diane just sat there holding her mug and letting me fall apart. When I could finally talk, the words came out in this jumbled mess. I told her about the restaurant jokes when I was 8, the Thanksgiving announcement when I was 13, the time they told my date I probably wasn't theirs before we even left for prom, the award ceremony where they made that joke in front of everyone important in my career. Every single time they made me feel like I didn't belong, like I was some mistake they were stuck with. I told her about Brandon leaving because he couldn't deal with parents who treated their kid like a punchline. About all the times I tried to make them proud, and they just made another joke instead. Diane nodded through all of it like she already knew, like she'd been watching this happen for years and just waiting for me to see it too. My phone started buzzing in my purse. Then it kept buzzing. I pulled it out and the screen was full of notifications, texts, and calls coming in so fast I couldn't read them before new ones appeared. Jeremy's name over and over. My cousin Rachel, my mom's sister, Uncle Mike, people from the party. The group chat with my cousins was going crazy, messages flying past too fast to follow. I opened Jeremy's texts first and immediately wished I hadn't. What were you thinking? Mom is hysterical. Dad punched a hole in the wall. How could you do this? What is wrong with you? Then my aunt, my mom's sister, sending me a long message calling me cruel and selfish and ungrateful, saying I humiliated my parents on their special day, that I should be ashamed, that I owed them a massive apology. More texts coming in. Some cousins asking what happened, some saying they saw videos already posted online, some taking my parents' side, some asking for my side of the story. The buzzing wouldn't stop. Every few seconds, another text, another call. I watched the notifications pile up until my hands started shaking again, and I just turned the whole phone off. The sudden silence felt heavy. Diane looked at me from her chair and I said I couldn't handle reading any more of it right now. She nodded and asked if I wanted more tea. I said yes, even though I hadn't touched the first cup. She got up and went back to the kitchen, giving me space to sit with what I'd just done. The blank papers were probably still scattered on the floor at the venue. My parents were probably still there. Or maybe they'd left, gone home to deal with this away from all those people and their cameras. Jeremy was probably trying to calm everyone down, doing what he always did, being the good kid who fixed things. And I was here on Diane's couch, having just blown up my entire family in front of 50 witnesses with phones. Diane came back and asked me the question I'd been avoiding asking myself. Did you plan this to hurt them? Or to make them understand how much they hurt you? I opened my mouth to say the second one, that I wanted them to understand, to feel what I felt. But sitting there in her living room with the weight of what I'd done settling over me, I realized I didn't actually know the answer. Maybe it was both. Maybe I wanted them to hurt the way they'd hurt me for years. Maybe I wanted them to feel rejected and unwanted and like they didn't belong. Maybe I wanted to watch them squirm in front of everyone the way I squirmed at that award ceremony. The thought scared me because I'd spent my whole life being the quiet one, the one who took the jokes and moved on, the one who didn't cause problems. I didn't think I was capable of planning something that cruel, that calculated. But I had. I'd spent weeks on it. I'd edited photos and made up stories and practiced my speech. I'd known exactly what I was going to do and I'd done it anyway, knowing it would destroy them in front of everyone they knew. That wasn't an accident or a moment of anger. That was revenge, cold and planned and executed perfectly. I looked at Diane and told her I didn't know, that maybe it was both, and she just nodded like that was the answer she expected. I spent the night in Diane's guest room, but I didn't really sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's face when I admitted I lied. the way it crumpled and twisted. I saw my dad lunging toward me with that expression I'd never seen before. Pure rage mixed with something that might have been hurt. I saw the guests with their phones out, capturing everything, posting it online for everyone to see. I saw Jeremy frozen at that table, his perfect life disrupted by his sister's breakdown. The blank papers scattered on the floor kept playing in my mind on repeat. I'd gotten exactly what I wanted. I'd made them feel the way they made me feel. I'd humiliated them publicly the way they humiliated me. I'd rejected them the way they spent years rejecting me. And it felt terrible. Not satisfying or justified or right, just terrible and hollow and wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Around 3 a.m, I got up and went to the bathroom, caught sight of myself in the mirror. Same face, same person, but somehow different now. Someone who could plan revenge and execute it perfectly. Someone who could hurt people on purpose and watch it happen. I went back to bed but still couldn't sleep. Just lay there staring at the ceiling and replaying everything on an endless loop until the sun started coming up. The phone rang around 8 a.m, and I heard Diane answer it in the kitchen. Her voice was quiet. Then I heard her say my name. She appeared in the doorway of the guest room holding her cordless phone. It's Sloan. She won't stop calling until she talks to you. I took the phone and Sloan didn't even say hello. Just started asking if I was okay, where I was, what happened. She'd seen videos of the party on someone's Instagram story. Multiple someone's apparently, because it was already spreading. She wanted to know if I needed her to come get me, if I was safe, if I'd lost my mind. I told her I was at Diane's and I was fine, and yes, I probably had lost my mind. She said she was coming over and hung up before I could argue. Diane took the phone back and said Sloan was a good friend. I nodded and got up to take a shower, hoping the hot water would make me feel more human. It didn't. After the shower, I knew I had to turn my phone back on eventually. I couldn't hide from it forever. I sat on the edge of the guest bed and pressed the power button, watching the screen light up. Immediately, the notifications started flooding in. 67 messages, 23 missed calls, voicemails, emails. The group chat had over 100 new messages. I scrolled through them slowly, my stomach getting tighter with each one. Jeremy's were the worst because they weren't angry like I expected. They were just confused and hurt. Why would you do this? You destroyed their special day. Everyone saw. There are videos everywhere. Mom won't stop crying. Dad is saying things I've never heard him say. Lisa is furious. The kids are asking questions we can't answer. You humiliated them in front of everyone they know. Why? Just why? I read through all his messages twice, looking for anger I could fight against. But there was just this bewildered hurt that made me feel sick. Then I listened to the voicemails. My mother's was just crying and the words, "How could you?" repeated over and over between sobs. How could you do this to us? How could you lie like that? How could you humiliate us? How could you? How could you? It went on for almost 2 minutes before she hung up. My father's message was completely different. His voice was cold and controlled, no emotion at all. Do not contact us again until you are ready to get down on your knees and apologize for what you did tonight. Do not call. Do not text. Do not show up at our house. You are not welcome until you are ready to beg forgiveness for this humiliation. Then he hung up. I sat there holding the phone, staring at the wall, and realized there was no going back from this. I'd wanted to make them feel what I felt, and I'd succeeded. But now I had to live with being the person who did it. I packed my stuff at Diane's place around noon and thanked her for letting me crash. She hugged me at the door and told me to call if I needed anything. That she meant it. The drive back to my apartment took 20 minutes, and I kept the radio off because I couldn't handle noise. I parked in my usual spot and climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, my legs feeling heavy like I'd run a marathon instead of just surviving one night away. Inside my apartment, everything looked the same but felt completely different. My sculptures sat on their shelves along the wall, pieces I'd sold copies of to galleries in 3 different cities. The award certificate hung in its frame above my desk, gold lettering on cream paper announcing my national recognition. I'd been so proud of that certificate when it arrived, had even considered showing it to my parents before remembering they'd just make another joke. Now I stood there staring at all of it and realized none of these accomplishments had ever been enough to make them stop. Not the award, not the gallery showings, not the collectors who paid actual money for my work. They'd kept joking anyway because the jokes were never really about me. They were about them feeling uncomfortable with a daughter who didn't fit their idea of what a daughter should be. My phone buzzed with a text from Sloan asking if I was home yet, if I was okay, if she could come over. I texted back my address and she showed up 40 minutes later with Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine. She set everything on my kitchen counter and started pulling out containers without asking what I wanted. Just started opening boxes and getting plates. We sat on my couch with food balanced on our laps and she waited for me to start talking. I told her everything about the fabricated evidence, how I'd edited the photos, made up the eye color thing, invented the story about my grandmother being a painter. She ate her lo mein slowly and didn't interrupt. Just let me explain how I'd planned it all for weeks. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time, just chewing and thinking. Then she asked if I'd thought about what would happen after the moment of satisfaction, after I got to watch them squirm. I admitted I hadn't really thought past the speech itself, past seeing their faces when they realized I was using their own joke against them. She nodded and said she got why I did it, that they'd been cruel for years and someone needed to call them out. But she also said the fallout was going to be bigger than I probably expected, that families don't forget public humiliation easily. The next morning, my gallery owner called while I was making coffee. Her voice was careful and professional, like she was trying not to sound worried, but definitely was. She said she'd heard about some family drama at a party this weekend. That word was spreading in the art community because someone had posted video clips on Instagram. She asked if I was okay, and I said yes, I was fine, it was just family stuff. Then she got to the real point. Said she was concerned this might affect my reputation since I'd just won a major award and was supposed to have a showing next month. Collectors and gallery owners talk, she explained. And they care about the artists they invest in being stable and professional. I felt my stomach twist because I hadn't considered that my personal life exploding would touch my career. She said she wasn't canceling anything, just wanted me to be aware that people were asking questions, and I should probably keep a low profile for a while. After we hung up, I sat on my couch staring at my phone and realized the consequences were spreading way beyond just my family. My professional reputation, the thing I'd built completely separate from my parents, was getting dragged into this mess. 3 days went by with me barely leaving my apartment. I worked on a new sculpture in my spare bedroom studio, ignored most of my messages, and tried to pretend everything was normal. Then Jeremy showed up without warning, knocking on my door late afternoon on Wednesday. I looked through the peephole and saw him standing there looking exhausted, his shirt wrinkled like he'd slept in it. I opened the door, and he walked in without waiting for an invitation, went straight to my couch and sat down heavily. He said Lisa was furious with me, that she'd been on the phone with our mother every day trying to calm her down. Their kids kept asking why Grandma and Grandpa were so upset, why they were crying, what had happened at the party. Jeremy ran his hands through his hair and said I'd made everything complicated for everyone, that now he was stuck in the middle trying to keep peace with our parents while his wife thought I'd lost my mind. I stood in my kitchen doorway watching him and felt anger building because of course he was here complaining about how hard this was for him. I finally snapped and asked if he'd ever noticed how they treated me differently, if he'd ever heard all those jokes and thought they were cruel. He looked up at me surprised, like he hadn't expected me to fight back. Then he admitted he'd noticed but thought I didn't let it bother me, that I seemed tough enough to handle their sense of humor. I laughed, an ugly sound that didn't match anything funny. I asked him how I was supposed to handle years of being told I wasn't really theirs, of having my boyfriend hear those jokes, and decide my family was too messed up to deal with, of winning a national award and having them make the joke in front of the presenter. Jeremy's face shifted, and he said he didn't realize it had been that bad, that from where he stood it just seemed like their weird way of joking around. I told him it wasn't joking when only one person was laughing, that it was just cruelty dressed up as humor. We ended up talking for almost 2 hours, the first real conversation we'd ever had about our childhood. Jeremy admitted he'd always felt pressure to be perfect, because he saw how they criticized me. He said he thought if he was good enough, did everything right, got perfect grades, and played the sports they wanted and married the right girl, then maybe they'd ease up on me. But it never worked because their problem wasn't with my behavior or my choices. Their problem was that I existed as someone they didn't understand. He told me about lying awake in high school worrying about disappointing them, about choosing business school even though he'd wanted to study history, about feeling like he had to be enough kid for both of us. I'd never known any of that. I'd spent years thinking he had it easy, that he was their favorite and didn't have to work for their approval. But he'd been working for it constantly, just in a different way, trying to be so perfect, they wouldn't have room to criticize anyone. When Jeremy finally left my apartment, the sun was setting and we hadn't resolved anything. He stood at my door and said Lisa wanted me to know I wasn't welcome at family events until this got fixed, until I apologized to our parents and everyone could move past it. I felt something crack in my chest because I hadn't thought about Victor and Virginia, about not being able to see my niece and nephew. They were 6 and 4, too young to understand adult drama, and now I was cut off from them because of what I'd done. Jeremy saw my face change and he looked sorry, but he didn't take it back. He said Lisa had to protect her kids from family chaos, and I was the chaos right now. After he left, I sat on my floor with my back against the door and cried for the first time since the party, not because I regretted what I'd done, but because I was realizing how much it was going to cost me. I'd known I'd lose my parents, but I hadn't counted on losing my brother's family too. 2 days later, Diane called to tell me what my parents were saying to everyone. She'd been at a family gathering, some cousin's birthday thing, and my parents were there holding court. They were telling everyone I'd had a mental breakdown, that they were very worried about me, that I'd always been sensitive and they thought I was handling things, but clearly they'd been wrong. They were positioning themselves as concerned parents dealing with a troubled daughter, completely rewriting what had actually happened at the party. Diane said people were buying it too, nodding sympathetically and asking what they could do to help. My mother cried about how she didn't understand where she'd gone wrong raising me, how she'd tried so hard to support my art, even though she didn't understand it. My father talked about considering getting me professional help, about maybe I needed therapy to work through whatever was making me act out like this. Diane was furious, but she couldn't exactly stand up in the middle of the party and tell everyone the real story. She said I needed to know they were controlling the narrative and making themselves the victims. That night, I got an email from my cousin Rachel asking for my side of the story. She said the family group chat was going crazy with different versions of what happened, and she wanted to hear directly from me. I sat at my laptop and wrote out everything. Every joke I could remember from childhood. The award ceremony incident with the presenter's horrified face. Brandon breaking up with me because the family dynamic was too weird, the anniversary party speech, and the fabricated evidence. I wrote about how they'd made me feel unwanted my entire life, and how I'd finally decided to show them what that felt like. It took me an hour to write it all out, and when I was done, I sent it to Rachel and 2 other cousins I'd always been close with, the ones who'd actually talked to me at family events instead of just tolerating my presence. The responses came back over the next day. Rachel wrote that she'd always thought the jokes were mean, but didn't feel like it was her place to say anything, that she was sorry she hadn't spoken up before. My cousin Mike said the same thing, that he'd cringed at family dinners hearing them make those comments but figured I could handle it. But my cousin Sarah wrote back saying I'd gone too far, that parents aren't perfect, but public humiliation was cruel, and I owed them an apology. 2 other cousins I'd sent the email to agreed with Sarah, said family problems should stay private and what I'd done was unforgivable. I read all the responses and realized my family was splitting down the middle over this, people taking sides based on whether they thought years of emotional harm justified one night of public revenge. I closed my laptop and knew there was no going back to how things were before, that I'd broken something in my family that wasn't going to heal easily, or maybe ever. My mother's sister called the next day, and I made the mistake of answering. She went on for 20 minutes straight about respect and family loyalty, about how I'd humiliated my parents in front of everyone they knew, about how I should be ashamed of myself for ruining their special night. I tried to explain about the years of jokes, about the award ceremony and Brandon and all of it, but she cut me off and said I was too sensitive. She said my parents' humor was just their way, and I should have developed thicker skin instead of being so dramatic about everything. She said families tease each other, and I'd turned normal parent behavior into some kind of trauma, when really I just couldn't take a joke. I hung up on her halfway through another lecture about gratitude. I couldn't sleep that night or the next 3 nights after. I kept replaying the party, seeing my mother's face go white, hearing my father shout, watching the guests pull out their phones. Then I'd replay other moments, the restaurant when I was 9 and they told the waiter I was adopted, the Thanksgiving when I was 13, the award ceremony. My brain wouldn't shut off and I'd lie there until sunrise staring at the ceiling. By the 4th night, I knew I needed help, so I found a therapist who had an opening that week. The therapist's office was small and calm, lots of plants and soft lighting that was probably supposed to be soothing. She asked me to explain what brought me in, and I told her everything, the whole story from childhood to the anniversary party. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she asked what I wanted to accomplish with the fake evidence. I started to give her the answer I'd been telling myself, about wanting them to understand, but then I stopped. I realized I wanted them to feel as rejected and unwanted as they'd made me feel my entire life. I wanted them to experience that sick feeling in your stomach when someone you love makes you the punchline. I wanted them to know what it was like to be dismissed and mocked and treated like you don't belong. The therapist nodded and wrote something down, and I felt exposed sitting there admitting I'd wanted to hurt them. 3 weeks after the party, I got an email from my father. It came through his lawyer's office email, formal and cold with legal letterhead. The message said that after careful consideration, they'd decided to remove me from their will effective immediately. It was professionally written, no emotion, just facts about estate planning and revised beneficiary designations. I read it twice and then I started laughing, this hysterical laugh that came out of nowhere and wouldn't stop. Of course they'd cut me out of the will. It was the ultimate version of their joke, the final proof that I wasn't really theirs. I laughed until I cried and then I just cried, sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open to that cold email. Sloan came over the next day to help me pack up family photos. I had maybe 15 pictures total scattered around my apartment, most of them shoved in a drawer. We went through them one by one and I threw most in the trash bag she'd brought. My parents at my high school graduation looking uncomfortable. A family Christmas photo where everyone smiled except me. My mother and father at some restaurant I didn't remember. Into the trash. I kept one photo of me and Diane at my art school showcase, both of us grinning. And weirdly, I kept one of me and Jeremy as kids, maybe 5 and 7 years old, building something with blocks on the living room floor. We looked happy in that one, before everything got so complicated between us. The gallery owner called me the following week about a collector who'd been interested in one of my bigger pieces. She sounded uncomfortable as she explained that he'd backed out of the purchase, citing concerns about my stability. Someone had told him about the family drama, and he didn't want to invest in work by an artist who might be having personal problems. I was furious, absolutely furious, because my personal life was affecting my career, the one thing I'd built completely separate from my family. I'd spent years establishing myself in the art world, and now their damage was spreading into that space too. I told the gallery owner I understood and hung up before I said something I'd regret. Jeremy texted 3 days later saying our parents were going to family therapy and wanted me to join them. I actually laughed out loud reading that message because the idea of them admitting they needed therapy was absurd. My parents thought therapy was for weak people who couldn't handle their own problems. I texted back that I'd think about it, but I wasn't ready, which was true. I couldn't imagine sitting in a room with them right now without completely losing it. Diane called that same night and admitted she was caught in the middle and it was exhausting her. My parents wouldn't speak to her because she was still talking to me, but she refused to cut me off. She said she was tired of family gatherings where people whispered about taking sides, tired of my mother calling her disloyal, tired of being pressured to choose. I told her she didn't have to choose sides, that I didn't want her caught up in this mess. She was quiet for a minute, and then she said she already chose sides years ago when she saw how they treated me, that she wasn't abandoning me now just because it was getting harder. I ran into Lisa at the grocery store 2 weeks later, and it was incredibly awkward. We both froze in the produce section, her with a cart full of kid snacks and me with my sad single-person groceries. She asked how I was doing in that polite, distant way people use when they don't really want to know. Then she said the kids asked about me and she didn't know what to say to them. She said Jeremy was stressed trying to keep peace with everyone and she wished I'd just apologized, so things could go back to normal. I stood there holding a bag of apples and realized Lisa didn't actually understand what happened. She only knew Jeremy's version and my parents' version, the one where I was cruel and dramatic for no good reason. I asked if she wanted to hear my side of the story, and she hesitated, actually stepped back a little with her cart. She said she didn't think it would help because she needed to support her husband, and she couldn't do that if she understood my perspective too well. Then she said she had to go and pushed her cart away, leaving me standing there alone in produce. My next therapy session, we worked on understanding why I chose public humiliation instead of private confrontation. The therapist asked why I didn't just talk to them first, explain how the jokes hurt me, give them a chance to stop before I retaliated. I admitted I wanted witnesses, wanted other people to see them squirm the way they'd made me squirm at that award ceremony when the presenter looked horrified. I wanted everyone who'd ever laughed at their jokes to see them humiliated and uncomfortable and desperate. I wanted proof that I wasn't crazy or too sensitive, that what they did was actually cruel enough to justify my anger. The therapist asked if I got what I wanted, and I said yes and no, because the satisfaction lasted about 30 seconds before everything else crashed down. 2 days later, I was scrolling through Facebook when I saw my cousin Rachel's post. It didn't name me, but it was obvious. Something about how real family sticks together through hard times and forgiveness is more important than pride. The comments filled up with relatives agreeing, talking about loyalty and how some people just want attention. I stared at it for maybe 5 minutes, reading each comment, watching more people pile on. Then I blocked Rachel. I blocked her mom who commented. I blocked 2 other cousins who added their thoughts about respect and family values. My finger hovered over the block button for each one and I realized something weird. I felt fine. I wasn't angry or hurt or desperate to defend myself. I was just done with people who thought I should quietly accept years of mistreatment, because that's what good daughters do. The list of people I could see on social media got shorter, and I felt lighter, not sadder. That same week, Brandon messaged me out of nowhere. The notification made my stomach drop because I hadn't thought about him in months. He said he heard about what happened at the party through mutual friends. He wrote this long message about feeling guilty for leaving me when things were hard with my family. He admitted he knew the jokes hurt me, but he didn't know how to help, and eventually he just couldn't handle being around it anymore. He said he felt like a bad person for choosing his own peace over supporting me. But then he added that even knowing what I went through, he still thought the dynamic was too broken for him to deal with. He said he hoped I was doing okay, but he couldn't have stayed even if he wanted to. I read it 3 times trying to figure out how I felt. I typed back that I didn't blame him anymore. I told him I understood now that you can't fix someone else's family problems. You can only decide if you can live with them, or if you need to walk away for your own mental health. I said what he did was probably the healthier choice even if it hurt at the time. He responded pretty quick saying he was glad I got it and he hoped things worked out for me. We left it there. No drama, no anger, just 2 people who tried something that didn't work and could finally be okay with that. I closed the message thread and felt something settle that had been bothering me since the breakup. He wasn't wrong for leaving and I wasn't wrong for being hurt about it. Jeremy texted 3 days after that with a message from our parents. They were willing to consider talking to me again if I posted a public apology on Facebook. They wanted me to admit I lied and say I was sorry for humiliating them at their anniversary. The message was very specific about it needing to be public, so everyone who saw the party drama would see me take it back. I read it twice to make sure I understood what they were actually asking. They wanted me to say I was completely wrong while they took 0 responsibility for anything they did. They wanted me to humiliate myself the way I humiliated them, and then maybe they'd think about forgiving me. I texted Jeremy back immediately that the answer was no. I told him I wasn't admitting I was wrong when they spent my whole life making me feel unwanted. He didn't respond. My next therapy session, the therapist said something that made me want to walk out. She said both things could be true at the same time. Their jokes were cruel and harmful and wrong, and my revenge was also harmful and wrong. She said I could be the victim of their bad behavior and still be responsible for my own bad behavior. I argued with her for like 10 minutes. I wanted to be completely right. I wanted them to be completely wrong. I needed it to be that simple because if it wasn't, then I had to sit with the fact that I hurt people on purpose, and that made me feel sick. She let me argue and then asked me to just think about it. Over the next few weeks, I kept coming back to it. The idea that I could be hurt and also cause hurt. That understanding why I did something didn't make it okay. That they could be terrible parents and I could still have chosen a terrible way to respond. It was harder to accept than anything else in therapy. When Thanksgiving came around, Sloan invited me to her family's house. I almost said no because the idea of sitting at someone else's family table felt wrong, but then I realized this was my first holiday without my parents, and I didn't want to spend it alone in my apartment eating takeout. Her mom answered the door and hugged me like she'd known me for years. The house smelled like turkey and pie and there were people everywhere talking and laughing. Nobody made jokes about me not belonging. Nobody commented on what I ate or how I dressed or whether I was living up to their expectations. Sloane's mom asked about my art and actually listened to the answer. Her dad told a story about Sloane as a kid and it was funny but not mean. I excused myself to the bathroom after dinner and cried for 5 minutes because this is what family dinner should feel like. No walking on eggshells. No waiting for the joke that would make everyone laugh except me. Just people being kind to each other because they wanted to be. My birthday came a few weeks later and I wasn't expecting much. Sloane took me out for drinks the night before. Diane sent flowers to my apartment. I was making coffee that morning when my phone rang and it was Jeremy. He didn't mention the party or our parents or any of the mess. He just asked how I was doing and told me about Victor learning to ride a bike and Virginia starting to read chapter books. We talked for maybe 20 minutes about completely normal stuff. His job, my latest sculpture project, the weather. It was the most normal conversation we'd had in months, and I didn't realize how much I missed just talking to my brother without all the weight of everything else. When we hung up, I felt grateful that he was trying even though things were still so broken between our family. That same afternoon, my mother left a voicemail. I saw her name on my phone and my whole body tensed up. I almost didn't listen to it, but I couldn't help myself. Her voice was soft and sad, and she said she'd been thinking about me on my birthday. She said she missed me and wished things were different. For about 10 seconds, I felt hope rising in my chest. Then she said she'd been looking at photos from the anniversary party and seeing how happy everyone was before I ruined it. She said she hoped I was happy now that I'd destroyed their special day and torn the family apart. The message ended and I just sat there staring at my phone. She couldn't even wish me happy birthday without making it about what I did to her. I deleted the voicemail without saving it and blocked her number. Diane called a week after my birthday and told me my parents' marriage was struggling. Apparently, they were fighting about whose fault the party disaster was. My father said my mother should have been more careful with her jokes over the years. My mother said my father encouraged the jokes and laughed the hardest. They were both rewriting history to make themselves look better and blame the other person. Diane said neither of them could admit they were both responsible. They'd rather tear each other apart than accept that they hurt their own daughter so badly. She felt like public revenge was her only option. I listened to Diane describe their fights and felt nothing. No satisfaction that they were suffering. No guilt that I caused it. Just this empty feeling like I was hearing about strangers. The gallery owner called 2 weeks later with news about a commission. Some tech company wanted a major sculpture piece for their headquarters lobby. Big budget, creative freedom, the kind of project that could really boost my career. I hung up the phone and my first thought was that I wanted to tell my parents. I actually pulled up my dad's contact before I remembered I couldn't call him. We weren't speaking. He'd cut me out of the will. My mother's number was blocked. This huge professional win, and I had nobody to share it with except Sloane and Diane. It hit me that this was grief. Not the grief of someone dying, but the grief of mourning a relationship with people who were still alive, but completely cut off from me now. I wanted parents who would be excited about my success, and I didn't have that. I might never have that. I put my phone down and sat with that loss until it felt a little less sharp. The next therapy session came 2 weeks later, and my therapist asked if I'd thought about what fixing things with my parents would actually look like. I hadn't really considered it beyond just wanting them to stop being terrible, so I sat there trying to figure out what I'd actually need from them. She handed me a piece of paper and told me to write it down. Make a real list of what reconciliation would require. I wrote genuine apology at the top, then acknowledgement of harm underneath it. I added changed behavior and respect for boundaries. I kept writing until I had maybe 10 things on the page, and when I looked at what I'd written, I felt this sinking feeling in my chest. They weren't capable of any of it. My parents couldn't apologize without making excuses or turning it back on me. They couldn't acknowledge harm without minimizing it or claiming I was too sensitive. The list sat there like proof that hoping for a real relationship with them was pointless, and my therapist just nodded like she'd been waiting for me to figure that out myself. 3 days later, Jeremy texted asking if I wanted to come to Victor's birthday party. He said Lisa agreed I could come, but only if I promised not to cause any drama or bring up the anniversary party disaster. I stared at that message for a long time, feeling insulted that they thought I needed that condition, like I was some bomb waiting to go off at a kid's birthday party. But I missed Victor and Virginia so much it physically hurt, so I texted back that I'd be there and I'd keep things calm. Jeremy sent back a thumbs up and the party details, and I spent the next week anxious about seeing everyone again. The party was at their house on Saturday afternoon, and I showed up with a present for Victor. This art kit I knew he'd love. The second I walked in the door, the whole atmosphere changed. Lisa smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes, and she watched me like I might start yelling at any second. Jeremy gave me a quick hug, and then immediately moved away to help with the other guests. I played with the kids, helped Victor open his presents, sang happy birthday, and avoided talking to anyone about anything real. Every conversation was surface-level small talk about the weather or traffic, or how fast the kids were growing. Lisa's parents were there and they barely acknowledged me, just gave these tight smiles before turning away. I lasted maybe 2 hours before the tension got so bad I couldn't breathe, so I told Jeremy I had to go and left early. Victor looked sad when I said goodbye, and that made leaving even worse. That night, Jeremy texted saying it meant a lot to the kids that I came. He said Victor kept asking when I'd visit again, and Virginia wanted to show me her new chapter books. Then he wrote something that surprised me. He admitted he was trying to figure out how to keep relationships with both me and our parents, and he was starting to realize it was almost impossible because they demanded complete loyalty from him. He said every time he talked to me, they asked what we discussed, whether I'd apologized yet, if I was coming to my senses. He felt stuck in the middle and didn't know how to make everyone happy, and I could tell from his messages that the pressure was getting to him. 2 days later, Jeremy forwarded me a bunch of messages from our parents. They'd found out I was at the birthday party, and they were furious with him for inviting me. My mother wrote that he was betraying them by letting me around the grandchildren, that I was a bad influence who would poison the kids against them. My father's messages were worse. He said Jeremy had to choose sides, that family loyalty meant standing with them against my disrespect and cruelty. He wrote that if Jeremy kept seeing me, then maybe he wasn't the son they thought he was either. I read through all the messages twice and felt sick. They were so controlling, trying to force Jeremy to cut me off completely, working to isolate me from everyone in the family. It wasn't enough that they weren't speaking to me. They needed everyone else to reject me too. My next therapy session focused on trying to understand why they'd made those jokes for so many years. My therapist asked what I thought was really happening when they called me not theirs, and I started working through it out loud. They were insecure about their own lives, disappointed that things hadn't turned out how they planned. I was different from them in every way, and instead of celebrating that or trying to understand me, they rejected it. They made me feel like the problem, because accepting me would mean accepting that their worldview was limited. The jokes weren't about me at all. They were about their own fears and disappointments, their inability to connect with someone who didn't fit their expectations. I sat there in that therapy office realizing my parents had spent my whole childhood making me feel unwanted because they couldn't handle their own insecurity. That understanding didn't make the hurt disappear or fix anything. I still felt all the years of rejection and casual cruelty, but it helped me see them differently. Not as these powerful figures whose opinion defined my worth, but as flawed people who handled their limitations badly. I started feeling less angry about the whole situation and more just sad. Sad that they couldn't be different. Sad that I'd never have the parents I wanted. Sad that we'd all wasted so much time on this toxic dynamic instead of trying to actually know each other. Sloan planned a weekend trip to help me clear my head, and we drove up to this little beach town 3 hours away. We walked on the beach, ate good food, stayed up late talking about everything except my family. Being away from all of it helped me see my life more clearly. I'd built something good despite my parents, not because of them. My art career, my friendships, my apartment, my whole life existed because I'd worked for it without their approval or support. They didn't give me any of the things that mattered. I'd created my own path and succeeded on my own terms, and that felt powerful in a way I hadn't recognized before. When we got back, Diane called with news that surprised me. She said my parents wanted to meet with me, just the three of us with no lawyers or other family members involved. She thought they might actually be ready to talk for real this time, but she warned me not to expect too much because people don't change overnight. She said they'd been in therapy themselves, and their therapist suggested this meeting, which was the only reason she thought it might be different from their usual blame and deflection. I told her I'd think about it and hung up feeling nervous about the whole idea. I spent 3 days thinking about whether to meet them. I almost texted Jeremy to say no at least 3 times. But finally I decided I needed to hear what they had to say, even if it went badly. I texted Diane back and said I'd meet them at a coffee shop neither of us usually went to, somewhere neutral where we wouldn't run into people we knew. She set it up for the following Saturday at 10 in the morning. The days leading up to it I felt scared and anxious, wondering if this was a mistake, if I was setting myself up for more hurt. But I kept the appointment in my calendar and told myself I could at least listen to what they wanted to say before deciding anything. Saturday morning, I walked into the coffee shop 10 minutes early and picked a table in the back corner where nobody would hear us if things got loud. My hands were shaking when I ordered my coffee and I spilled some on the counter because I couldn't hold the cup steady. I sat down facing the door and watched people come in, checking my phone every 30 seconds even though I knew what time it was. My parents arrived together at exactly 10, both looking older than I remembered from just a few months ago. My mother's eyes were red like she'd been crying that morning, and my father's jaw was tight in that way it got when he was trying not to show he was upset. They sat down across from me without ordering anything, and we just stared at each other for a minute that felt like an hour. My mother started crying almost immediately, pulling tissues from her purse and dabbing at her eyes. My father cleared his throat twice before speaking, and said they'd been thinking about everything that happened. He said they never meant to hurt me with the jokes and they thought I understood they were just kidding around. My mother nodded and said she was shocked when I did that thing at their party because she really believed I knew they loved me even if they teased sometimes. I felt my chest get tight listening to them because they still weren't getting it. My father said he was hurt that I would make up lies and embarrass them in front of everyone they knew. He said their friends had been calling asking if everything was okay, and they didn't know what to tell people. My mother added that some of their relatives stopped talking to them because they thought the fake evidence was real. I realized they'd spent the whole time since the party focused on how my revenge affected them, not on why I did it in the first place. I started listing every single thing I could remember. The restaurant when I was 8 and ordered pasta instead of steak. The soccer field when I quit, and my mother told the other parents I must not really be hers. The Thanksgiving when I was 13 with the black hair. The award ceremony where they said they weren't sure I was theirs right in front of the presenter and the whole audience. My ex leaving because he said my family was too weird. Every dinner, every holiday, every time they introduced me to someone new with that same joke. My mother kept interrupting me trying to explain what they really meant each time. She said the restaurant thing was just funny because I was such a picky eater. She said the award ceremony comment was their way of showing they were proud in a joking way, She said they never thought I took it seriously because I seemed fine. I finally snapped and told her I didn't care what they meant. I said intentions don't matter when you spend years making your kid feel unwanted. I said impact is what counts. And the impact was that I grew up thinking they wished they had a different daughter. My father's face got red and he started to argue, but I kept going. I told them about the nights I cried in my room wondering what was wrong with me. I told them about trying so hard to be different, to like the things they liked, to fit what they wanted. I told them I gave up on that when I realized nothing I did would ever be good enough because I wasn't built the way they expected. My father was quiet for a long time after that. He stared at his hands on the table and I could see him working through something in his head. Finally, he said maybe they were too hard on me sometimes. He said I was so different from them and from Jeremy, and they didn't really understand why. He said they didn't know how to connect with a kid who liked art and books and theater when they were all about sports and business. He admitted they probably handled it badly, but he stopped short of actually saying sorry. It wasn't a real apology, but it was the first time he'd ever admitted any fault at all. My mother was nodding, but she looked uncomfortable, like she wanted to argue but knew she couldn't. I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but maybe the smallest bit of understanding that they were just people who screwed up, not monsters who hated me on purpose. I told them I couldn't keep having a relationship where I was the punchline of their jokes. I said I couldn't be around people who treated my differences like defects, or made me feel like I had to prove I was good enough to be part of the family. I said every time they made those comments, it reminded me that I didn't fit their picture of what a daughter should be, and I was done feeling bad about that. They both looked really uncomfortable and shifted in their seats. My mother said she would try to do better. She said she didn't realize how much the jokes bothered me and she'd be more careful about what she said. My father nodded and said they could work on it. I knew these weren't big promises, and I didn't totally believe them, but at least they were acknowledging something needed to change. We sat there for another 20 minutes talking in circles about the past and what went wrong. We didn't fix anything or resolve the years of hurt. There was too much history for one conversation to make it all better. But before we left, my father suggested maybe we could try family therapy together. He said they'd been seeing someone on their own, and the therapist thought it might help if I joined them. I was surprised they'd gone to therapy at all since they usually thought that stuff was pointless. I told them I wasn't promising anything and I wasn't saying we'd definitely fix our relationship. I said I'd give therapy a chance to see if anything could be saved, but they needed to understand I might decide it wasn't worth it. They both agreed and we exchanged numbers for the therapist, so I could set up an appointment. Walking out of that coffee shop felt weird, like nothing was resolved, but maybe something small had started. The first family therapy session 2 weeks later was awful. We sat in this small office with comfortable chairs and a box of tissues on every table. The therapist was a woman probably in her 50s who seemed nice enough when I met her in the waiting room. But once we all sat down together, my parents spent the entire hour defending themselves. My mother explained how the jokes were just their family's sense of humor. My father talked about how I was always so sensitive and took things the wrong way. Every time the therapist tried to get them to talk about how their words affected me, they circled back to their intentions and how they never meant any harm. The therapist had to redirect them constantly, asking them to focus on my experience instead of their explanations. I left that session feeling completely drained and wondering if this was even worth the energy. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 15 minutes before I could drive home because I felt so tired from fighting to be heard. The second session 3 weeks later went a little better though. The therapist started by setting ground rules about listening without interrupting and focusing on feelings instead of blame. She asked my father directly about why he made jokes about me not being his kid. He was quiet for a while and then said something I didn't expect. He admitted the jokes came from feeling disconnected from me. He said when I was little he tried to bond with me over sports and outdoor stuff like he did with Jeremy, but I wasn't interested in any of it. He said he didn't know how to relate to a daughter who wanted to read and do art instead of playing catch or going fishing. The jokes became his way of dealing with that disconnect, even though he knew now it was wrong. It wasn't an excuse for years of making me feel unwanted, but at least it was honest. I could see him struggling to say it, and I realized this was hard for him too in a different way. My mother had a much harder time taking any responsibility. She spent most of the third and fourth sessions deflecting and explaining. But finally in the fifth session she admitted something that surprised me. She said she felt threatened by my independence and creativity. She said watching me succeed at art and build a career doing something she didn't understand made her feel less important somehow. She said the jokes were her way of feeling less inadequate, which was twisted logic, but at least she was acknowledging she'd been wrong. The therapist helped her see how she'd been projecting her own insecurity onto me, making me carry the weight of her disappointment with her own life. It didn't fix everything, but it helped me understand the jokes were never really about me at all. After 3 months of weekly therapy sessions, we reached this fragile understanding between us. My parents were actually working on changing how they talked to me and about me. They'd catch themselves starting to make a joke and stop. My mother called me twice just to ask how I was doing without any cutting comments. My father sent me an article about a sculptor he saw featured in a magazine. These were small things, but they felt big after years of nothing. I was working on trusting that the changes might actually stick this time. We started having dinner together once a month with the therapist there to help guide our conversations. The therapist taught us how to communicate without falling into old patterns. My parents learned to ask about my work instead of dismissing it. I learned to give them a chance to be different instead of assuming the worst. It was slow and sometimes painful, and we had setbacks where old habits came back. But we kept showing up to therapy and kept trying. Jeremy called me one night sounding relieved that we were at least talking again. He said it had been really hard being stuck in the middle and he was glad we were working on things. Lisa started warming up to me again too after months of being cold. She invited me to a barbecue at their house and actually talked to me like a normal person, instead of someone who might cause problems. The kids got really excited when they saw me, running up and hugging me and asking where I'd been. Victor wanted to show me his new bike, and Virginia wanted me to see her room that they'd repainted. Being around them reminded me why I'd pushed through all the uncomfortable therapy sessions and difficult conversations. Watching them laugh and play made me realize that keeping some kind of relationship with my family was worth the work, even if it would never be perfect or easy. My next gallery showing came up 6 months into therapy, and I sent my parents an invitation without really expecting them to come. But they showed up 20 minutes after the opening started, looking uncomfortable in their dress clothes and staying near the entrance like they might need to escape. I watched them from across the room as they looked at my sculptures, actually stopped and read the descriptions, and my mother even took out her phone to take a picture of one piece. My father stood in front of my award-winning sculpture for almost 5 minutes, just staring at it, and when an older couple came up and asked him about it, he told them I was his daughter and that he was proud of my work. The words came out stiff and awkward like he was reading from a script, but he said them. The couple asked more questions about my art, and my father answered them, talking about how I'd been doing sculpture since college, how I'd won a national award, and he didn't make a single joke about me not being his real kid, or wishing I'd done something else with my life. I had to walk away to the bathroom because I felt tears coming, and I didn't want to cry in the middle of my own gallery opening. Diane found me in the hallway outside the bathroom dabbing at my eyes with a tissue, and she just pulled me into a hug without saying anything. When we went back inside, she stood with me near the refreshments table, and we watched my parents slowly make their way around the gallery, and I saw her wipe her own eyes. She told me she'd spent years worrying about me, watching my parents treat me like I was some kind of mistake, and she'd felt helpless because calling them out only made them defensive. She said seeing us all in the same room being civil, watching my father actually tell strangers he was proud of me, meant more to her than I probably understood. I thanked her for never giving up on me, for being the one person who consistently saw how cruel the jokes were and called it out even when it made family gatherings tense. She squeezed my hand and said she'd do it all over again because I deserved to have at least one person in my corner. My parents left after an hour, which was about all they could handle, but my mother hugged me goodbye and my father shook my hand and said it was a good show. It wasn't warm or comfortable or anything like what I'd wished for as a kid, but it was different from before, and that mattered. The relationship with my parents will never be what I wanted growing up. They're not suddenly understanding people who get my art or my choices, and years of feeling unwanted don't just disappear because we're doing therapy. But we've established basic respect and boundaries that didn't exist before. They catch themselves when they start to make jokes now, they ask about my work instead of dismissing it, and they're genuinely trying to change their patterns, even though it's clearly hard for them. It's more than I expected 6 months ago when I sat in that first therapy session thinking the whole thing was pointless. I'm building a life now that includes them in limited ways while keeping my chosen family as the priority. Sloan comes to every gallery opening. Diane calls me twice a week just to check in, and the cousins who supported me have become closer friends than they ever were before. I see my parents once a month for supervised dinners. I go to some family events where I can leave when I need to, and I've accepted that this is what our relationship looks like. The revenge at their anniversary party destroyed the old toxic dynamic where they could joke about me not being theirs, and I was supposed to just take it. The aftermath was brutal and messy, and I lost some family members who thought I went too far, but it forced conversations that needed to happen. I'm finally okay with being exactly who I am, making art that matters to me, building relationships with people who actually see me, and I don't need my parents to fully understand me anymore because I understand myself.